All right, NFL fans, football fans in general, welcome to the Call Sheet Daily. I'm your host, Kevin Smith, here at the Fans First Sports Network, and we're excited to bring you another week of shows. We've been rolling along here in the offseason of the NFL world. There's so much to talk about, even though it's May and there's not real football on tap for a few more months. But the NFL never sleeps, and we don't sleep either. And I got a great week of shows lined up for you here. Today, we're talking about linebackers. What's happened to the linebacker position in modern football? They're almost like the woolly mammoth, man, this great beast that used to roam the earth with a certain presence that has gone extinct. Is that an accurate narrative, or have linebackers simply transformed? Do they just look a little bit different today than they once did? And great shows lined up later in the week, man. Wednesday, we're going to get into the psychology of coaching in our Whiteboard Wednesday segment. Thursday, we're going to profile the San Francisco 49ers in our State of the Franchise segment. They just signed Brock Purdy to a big deal. And then Friday's our hot route with Pez from Pez's Picks, who, speaking of hot, man, he has been on an absolute heater. He had a 10-game NBA playoff winning streak going into the weekend. I'll have to check on how he did. I'm not sure how he did this weekend, but he had 10 in a row picking games, Pez. And we've been having a blast doing our Hot Route show on Friday, which is conversations about football and about life. We're covering football, but we're also covering a myriad of topics. Last week, we got into conspiracy theories, horse race etiquette, going to the track as little kids with our relatives, etc. It's been great conversations with Pez. So stay here all week for some really good stuff on the Call Sheet Daily. Today, though, linebackers. So I got into this topic because I read the news the other day of the 49ers signing Brock Purdy to a contract extension. Congratulations to Brock Purdy, from Mr. Irrelevant to now a guy who's going to get paid over $50 million a year. That is fantastic. An amazing story, Brock Purdy. I'm waiting for the movie. The Brock Purdy version of Rudy, I'm sure, will be on tap at some point in the future. But in looking at Purdy's contract, I was just, Googling around the web to see where that slotted in amongst the highest paid quarterbacks. And that kind of sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole where I then just started to look at salaries in general in the NFL. And then, of course, who are the top players in the league as a whole? What position groups are getting paid the most? And it was really that search that got me to today's topic. Because as I went, I kept waiting for the linebackers to come up. Where do the linebackers rank? I'm a wannabe linebacker. I played safety in college. I just wasn't big enough to be a linebacker. But my favorite players were always linebackers. My very first favorite football player as a little kid was Jack Lambert, number 58 of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I had Jack Lambert posters in my room as a kid. I had Jack Lambert knockoff jerseys that you'd get at Kmart. I don't even think they sold real jerseys back then. You just had that mesh tearaway jersey, which everybody loved. And it was all Jack Lambert. And then when I was in high school, after Jack Lambert had retired, it was Chris Spielman, linebacker at Ohio State, number 36 for the Ohio State Buckeyes. It's funny, when I got to college, I asked for number 36. I was playing safety. They gave me 45. 45 really felt like a D-back number. I wanted a linebacker number. And Chris Spielman had just won the Lombardi Trophy as the best linebacker in the nation at Ohio State. He was wearing 36. I loved watching him play. I wanted to model myself after Chris Spielman. Ronnie Lott was the closest thing I could find to a safety who played like a linebacker. They gave me 45. I ended up with 49 somehow, whatever. But linebackers, they were, to me, they epitomized football. They were tough. They played downhill. They tackled. They called the defense. The images of Mike Singletary lined up in his stance with his legs pumping and churning in a frenzied fashion before the snap. That was a football player to me. And for a long time, the linebacker was one of the most glorified positions. When you think about the early stages of football, players like Dit Butkus and Ray Nitschke were those linebackers for program or teams like the Bears and the Packers, these storied NFL teams. They were the marquee guys. And I'm doing this search over the weekend for salaries, and I'm ticking through them: quarterbacks, wide receivers, edge, D-line, corner, O tackles, O linemen, safeties, running backs. Where are the linebackers? You had to go all the way down to the bottom of the list. The only position group being paid less annually right now than linebackers is tight ends. Tight ends. That's it. Every other position group makes more money on average annually than do linebackers. If you look at the highest paid players in the NFL by position group, quarterback, it's Dak Prescott at $60 million a year. There are 15 quarterbacks who are making more than any other player at any other position group. The highest 15 paid players in the league are all quarterbacks. You got to get to Jamar Chase, wide receiver, at $40.25 million a year to find the highest non-paid quarterback. He's 16th. The highest paid edge is Myles Garrett at $40 million a year. The highest paid defensive lineman is Chris Jones at $31 million a year. Next is corner, Darryl Stingley Jr., $30 million a year. Then O-line, Tristan Wirfs, $28 million. Then safety, Antoine Winfield, $21 million. Then running back, Saquon Barkley, $20.6 million. And finally, you find a linebacker, Roquan Smith of the Baltimore Ravens, at $20 million a year. Second to last. Highest individual player amongst position groups, and second to last highest annual salary. Here are the annual salaries of the top 10 paid positions, or players, I should say, at each position group. The top 10 highest paid players at each position group. Here is their average annual salary. At quarterback, it's $50.5 million a year. The top 10 paid quarterbacks average annually $50 million a year. At wide receiver, it's 29.5. At edge, it's 29.2. 25.8 on the D-line, 23.4 at corner, 23.2 on the O-line, 15.9 at safety, 14.1 at running back, and then 13.7 at linebacker. The linebackers, at least from a contractual standpoint, have been significantly devalued. Or if we say it another way, because I'm not sure that's an accurate statement or an accurate way to put it, the emphasis on linebackers is not keeping pace with other position groups in terms of how they're being paid. Salaries have obviously exploded across the NFL. There's lots of reasons for it. If you go back to when the salaries first began to jump up, which is the 1980s, you had several factors. In the 1970s, salaries were relatively low. The average NFL salary was below $100,000 a year. No position group seemed to exceed the others. Running backs were the highest paid offensive position groups, and linebackers were the highest paid defensive position groups into the 1980s. But the impact of, for example, rival leagues like in the 60s and 70s, the AFL, and then the World Football League, but then really in the 80s, the USFL, because you had some owners in that league that actually had some money that they could throw at marquee players like Herschel Walker and Jim Kelly and Bruce Smith, et cetera. And that really forced the NFL to start to keep pace. And then you had two NFL strikes in 1982 and 1987. The NFL players went on strike. And the result of those strikes was that they won collective bargaining rights. They got to collectively bargain. They got to negotiate with the owners the terms of their contracts. And salaries just leapt up as a result. The average NFL salary in 1986, in the midst of those strikes, was $198,000 a year. 8 years later, 1994, when the dust is kind of settled from the strikes, the average NFL salary is $850,000. It has more than quadrupled in a decade. And it was collective bargaining rights that really got it done. And in the 21st century, it's been television rights. The absolute explosion of NFL popularity via television and all the streaming services that are now involved has caused the salary cap to explode. Well, that explosion has obviously led to a dramatic increase in salaries, but the emphasis on where the money's gone has been radically different. Again, I said that the highest paid average position groups in the 1980s were running backs and linebackers, and you now see those two position groups at the bottom. The bottom three regular position groups now are running back, linebacker, tight end. Why? What has happened that has caused the explosion of money in the NFL to go elsewhere, away from linebackers in particular? Well, I think the biggest reason is because just the game has changed. In the 1980s, teams ran the football. That was still an era where running the ball was paramount. But that is the decade also that began to change this. When I was doing my podcast a few weeks back on the air raid, I went into a history of all of that. How did we get from, in college football, for example, in 1981, teams running the wishbone as a feature offense, to 1989 with the run and shoot? A massive evolution in the style of play in the 80s. And it has only continued to trend away from the run game and towards the passing game. And obviously that has led to an emphasis on the defensive side of the ball on speed. Defenses are trying to get faster because they have to match the speed that offenses are putting on the field. Offenses would base overwhelmingly out of 21 or 12 personnel up to the 1980s, which meant two running backs, one of them usually a fullback, or two tight ends on the field. But beginning in the 1990s, the move was overwhelmingly towards 11 personnel, which meant you were taking a tight end or a fullback off and you were replacing that player with a wide receiver. More speed on the field on offense made having two old school downhill run thumping linebackers an antiquated concept. You needed to get faster at the linebacker position. Today, the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team I cover very closely, they still base out of a 3-4 defense, but that's just a matter of convenience. That's because when we think about defense, we think about it as, would you run a 3-4 or a 4-3? Are you an odd or are you an even? But the Steelers are only in their 3-4 base on about 30% of their defensive snaps. It's disingenuous to really call it a base when they play it on less than a third of their snaps. What they're in more often than anything else is some kind of nickel. They're now taking a linebacker, and this is really more common in your 4-3 teams than your 3-4 teams. But in your 4-3 teams are running a lot of 4-2-5. The Steelers are running more 2-4-5. They still value linebackers in the old school 3-4. But those 4-3 teams are oftentimes removing a linebacker from the field and replacing him with a big nickel, a third safety, a slot corner. Why? Because you have to play sub-package defense to match the personnel on offense. There's also this. With these changes in offensive football, the role of the modern linebacker has evolved significantly. Again, you go back to a Jack Lambert or a Chris Spielman, what were they really being asked to do? I mean, Lambert was a little unique in that he was more athletic and could play the pass, but for the most part, they were B-gap to B-gap. They were downhill run thumpers. They were playing in the box. Today's linebacker still has to be able to fit the run, but with the popularity of the wide zone scheme and all the perimeter screens that teams run, he's got to be able to get out of the box as well. He's got to be able to fit the run on the perimeter. He's got to be able to zone cover. He's got to be able to man cover. He's got to be able to rush the passer. He's kind of like a 5-tool baseball player. You think about Mike Trout in his prime 7-8 years ago. Probably the best 5-tool baseball player the league has seen this century. Those guys don't come along very often. There aren't a lot of linebackers who can do all of the things that you need a modern linebacker to do. So what have teams done Instead, they've tried to find multiple specialists, guys that are really good at one thing. The nickel corner who's good in the slot because he can play those shifty slot receivers, or the safety, the third safety who can walk down. And if you want to be a 12 personnel offense with a detached tight end, he can man up on that tight end in the slot while still giving you good run support. Getting those specialists to do one or two of those things that linebackers are now required to do is easier than finding one great linebacker who can do it all. So I don't know if it's a question of linebackers not being as important as they once were. It's just that the allocation of resources is different, and teams are using their resources from a personnel standpoint differently. And also, obviously, their financial resources differently. It's just change. It's change in the game. It's evolution in the game. Again, I don't feel that linebackers are not important. Try running a defense at any level of football without a good run-stopping linebacker. See how much success your defense has. You can't stop the run. You're doomed. But today's linebackers got to be able to do more than just stop the run. And that's where it gets a little more complicated. So let's end with this. Who's the prototype? Who's the modern prototype now at the linebacker position? Well, I think really for the last 5-6 years, it's been guys like Roquan Smith, who is the highest paid linebacker in the league, and Fred Warner, who's now right around the age of 35. He's been great for a long, long time. But those guys are starting to get up there. They're both on the other side of 30 now. The guy who I look at, when I look at Nick Bolton of the Kansas City Chiefs, when I watch him play, to me, he is the prototypical modern NFL linebacker. Nick Bolton was phenomenal in this last Super Bowl, even though Kansas City got it handed to him by the Eagles. Nick Bolton was all over the field, making plays everywhere for that Kansas City defense that kind of got run on by the Eagles. But he popped because he can fit the run, because he can get out in space, because he can cover, he can rush the passer. Man, can he tackle? Linebackers have got to be able to tackle. He can tackle. If I were starting a defense from scratch and I had the opportunity to pick any single linebacker in the league to put on that defense, I would take Nick Bolton. To me, he is the prototype for the way defense is being played in the year 2025. And it's only a matter of time before he hits his payday. And it'll be very interesting to see what he gets, because I use the word evolution. This could change again. You may see, while you may not see the linebacker position as a whole rise significantly in value in terms at least of how they're being paid, you may see the guys who can do it all, like Nick Bolton, start to get paid handsomely. We saw it with running backs. There was a lot of conversation about the running back position being devalued, and then suddenly Saquon Barkley got a massive deal from the Eagles, $20+ million a season, and then, of course, turned in a ridiculous year last season, as did Derrick Henry, and he just got rewarded with a great extension as well. So it'll be very interesting to see what Nick Bolton gets paid when his extension comes around. So the linebacker position, man, the woolly mammoth. I love it. And I hope that people don't forget how great and how important linebackers are to the game of football. All right, that's our Monday morning opener. Join me again tomorrow. And then later in the week, of course, as we have some of our big feature shows, Whiteboard Wednesday, our State of the Franchise show on Thursday is going to be the 49ers this week. And then our show, The Hot Route with Pez on Friday. That's a great, fun conversation to kick off your weekend. Until then, hope everybody has a great day. This is Kevin Smith for the Call Sheet Daily. Take care.